Ancient Greek literature refers to literature written in the ancient Greek language from the earliest texts until roughly the rise of the Byzantine Empire. Homer is often regarded as the greatest of all Greek writers. Classical and pre-classical antiquity. This period of Greek literature stretches from Homer until the 4th century BC and the rise of Alexander the Great. The earliest known Greek writings are Mycenaean, written in the Linear B syllabary on clay tablets. These documents contain prosaic records largely concerned with trade. No real literature has been discovered. Several theories have been advanced to explain this curious absence. One is that Mycenaean literature, like the works of Homer and other epic poems, was passed on orally. Since the Linear B syllabary is not well suited to recording the sounds of Greek literature was divided in well-defined literary genres, each one having a compulsory formal structure, about both dialect and metrics. The first division was between prose and poetry. Fictional literature was written in verse, while scientific literature was in prose. Within the poetry we could separate three supergenres: epic, lyric and drama. We can observe here that the Greek terminology has become the common European terminology about literary genres. Lyric and drama were further divided into more genres. Lyric in 4, drama in 3. About literature in prose there was more freedom. The main areas were historiography, philosophy and political rhetoric. Epic poetry. At the beginning of Greek literature stand the two monumental works of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The figure of Homer is shrouded in mystery. Although the works as they now stand are credited to him, it is certain that their roots reach far back before his time. The Iliad is the famous story about the Trojan War. It centers on the person of Achilles, who embodied the Greek heroic ideal. While the Iliad is pure tragedy, the Odyssey is a mixture of tragedy and comedy. It is the story of Odysseus, one of the warriors at Troy. After 10 years fighting the war, he spends another 10 years sailing back home to his wife and family. Penelope was considered the ideal female. Homer depicted her as the ideal female based on her commitment, modesty, purity, and respect during her marriage with Odysseus. During his 10-year voyage, he loses all of his comrades and ships and makes his way home to Ithaca disguised as a beggar. Both of these works were based on ancient legends. The stories are told in language that is simple and direct. The Homeric dialect was an archaic language based on Ionic dialect mixed with some element of Aeolic dialect and Attic dialect, the latter due to the Athenian addition of the 6th century BC. The epic verse was the hexameter. The other great poet of the pre-classical period was Hesiod. Unlike Homer, Hesiod speaks of himself in his poetry. It remains true that nothing is known about him from any external source. He was a native of Boeotia in central Greece, and is thought to have lived and worked around 700 BC. His two works were Works and Days and Theogony. The first is a faithful depiction of the poverty-stricken country life he knew so well, and it sets forth principles and rules for farmers. Theogony is a systematic account of creation and of the gods. It vividly describes the ages of mankind, beginning with a long-past golden age. Together the works of Homer and Hesiod comprised a kind of Bible for the Greeks. Homer told the story of a heroic relatively near past, which Hesiod bracketed with a creation narrative and an account of the practical realities of contemporary daily life. Lyric poetry. The type of poetry called lyric got its name from the fact that it was originally sung by individuals or a chorus accompanied by the instrument called the lyre. Although, despite the name of the lyric poetry in this general meaning was divided in 4 genres, 2 of which were not accompanied by cithara, but by flute. These 2 latter genres were elegiac poetry and iambic poetry. Both were written in Ionic dialect. Elegiac poetry was in elegiac couplets and iambic poems in iambic trimeter. The first of the lyric poets was probably Archilochus of Paros, circa 700 BC, the most important iambic poet. Only fragments remain of his work, as is the case with most of the poets. The few remnants suggest that he was an embittered adventurer who led a very turbulent life. The lyric in narrow sense was written in Aeolic dialect and meters were really varied. The most famous authors were the so-called 9 lyric poets, and particularly Alcaeus and Sappho for monodic lyric and Pandarus for choral lyric. Drama. Ancient Greek drama developed around Greece's theatre culture. Drama was particularly developed in Athens, so works are written in Attic dialect. The dialogues are in iambic trimeter, while chorus are in the meters of choral lyric. In the age that followed the Greco-Persian Wars, the awakened national spirit of Athens was expressed in hundreds of superb tragedies based on heroic and legendary themes of the past. The tragic plays grew out of simple choral songs and dialogues performed at festivals of the god Dionysus. In the classical period, performances included 3 tragedies and 1 pastoral drama depicting 4 different episodes of the same myth. Wealthy citizens were chosen to bear the expense of costuming and training the chorus as a public and religious duty. Attendance at the festival performances was regarded as an act of worship. Performances were held in the great open-air theatre of Dionysus in Athens. All of the greatest poets competed for the prizes offered for the best plays. All fully surviving Greek tragedies are conventionally attributed to Aeschylus, Sophocles or Euripides. There are 2 Greek tragedies, however, for which the authorship is disputed. 7 tragedies of Aeschylus are survive, among which are the Oresteia, the only extant Greek trilogy. One of these 7, however, may actually be the work of his son Euphoron. 7 works of Sophocles have survived, the most acclaimed of which are the 3 Theban plays. From Euripides, 19 tragedies have survived, the most well-known among them being Medea, Hippolytus, and Baccha. Rhesus is sometimes thought to have been written by Euripides' son, or to have been a posthumous reproduction of a play by Euripides. Like tragedy, comedy arose from a ritual in honor of Dionysus, but in this case the plays were full of frank obscenity, abuse, and insult. At Athens, the comedies became an official part of the festival celebration in 486 BC, and prizes were offered for the best productions. As with the tragedians, few works still remain of the great comedic writers. Of the works of earlier writers, only some plays by Aristophanes exist. These are a treasure trove of comic presentation. He poked fun at everyone and every institution, for boldness of fantasy, for merciless insult, for unqualified indecency, and for outrageous and free political criticism. There is nothing to compare to the comedies of Aristophanes. In The Birds, he held up Athenian democracy to ridicule. In The Clouds, he attacked the philosopher Socrates. In Lysistrata, he denounced war. Only 11 of his plays have survived. The third dramatic genre was the satyr play. Although the genre was popular, only one example has survived in its entirety, Euripides' Cyclops. Historiography. 2 of the most famous historians who have ever written flourished during Greece's classical age, Herodotus and Thucydides. Herodotus is commonly called the father of history, and his history contains the first truly literary use of prose in Western literature. Of the 2, Thucydides was the more careful historian. His critical use of sources, inclusion of documents, and laborious research made his history of the Peloponnesian War a significant influence on later generations of historians. A third historian of ancient Greece, Xenophon, began his Hellenica where Thucydides ended his work about 411 BC and carried his history to 362 BC. His writings were superficial in comparison to those of Thucydides, but he wrote with authority on military matters. He therefore is at his best in the Anabasis, an account of his participation in a Greek mercenary army that tried to help the Persian Cyrus expel his brother from the throne. Xenophon also wrote 3 works in praise of the philosopher Socrates: Apology, Symposium, and Memorabilia. Although both Xenophon and Plato knew Socrates, their accounts are very different. and it is interesting to compare the view of the military historian to that of the poet-philosopher. Philosophy. The greatest achievements of the 4th century was in philosophy. There were many Greek philosophers, but Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle tower above the rest and had enormous influence on Western society. Socrates himself wrote nothing, but his thought is believed to be given by Plato's early Socratic dialogues. Aristotle is virtually without rivals among scientists and philosophers. The first sentence of his Metaphysics reads, "All men by nature desire to know." He has, therefore, been called the father of those who know. His medieval disciple Thomas Aquinas referred to him simply as the philosopher. Aristotle was a student at Plato's academy, and it is known that, like his teacher, he wrote dialogues, or conversations. None of these exist today. The body of writings that has come down to the present probably represents lectures that he delivered at his own school in Athens, the Lyceum. Even from these books the enormous range of his interests is evident. He explored matters other than those that are today considered philosophical. The treatises that exist cover logic, the physical and biological sciences, ethics, politics, and constitutional government. There are also treatises on the soul and rhetoric. His Poetics has had an enormous influence on literary theory and served as an interpretation of tragedy for more than 2,000 years. With his death in 322 BC, the classical era of Greek literature drew to a close. Ancient Greece Hellenistic period. By 338 BC all of the Greek city-states except Sparta had been conquered by Philip II of Macedon. Philip's son Alexander the Great extended his father's conquests greatly. Athens lost its preeminent status as the leader of Greek culture, and it was replaced temporarily by Alexandria, Egypt. The city of Alexandria in northern Egypt became, from the 3rd century BC, the outstanding center of Greek culture. It also soon attracted a large Jewish population, making it the largest center for Jewish scholarship in the ancient world. In addition, it later became a major focal point for the development of Christian thought. The museum, or shrine to the Muses, which included the library and school, was founded by Ptolemy I. The institution was from the beginning intended as a great international school and library. The library, eventually containing more than 500,000 volumes, was mostly in Greek. It served as a repository for every Greek work of the classical period that could be found. Hellenistic poetry. Poetry flourished in Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. The chief Alexandrian poets were Theocritus, Callimachus, and Apollonius of Rhodes. Theocritus, who lived from about 310 to 250 BC, invented a new genre of poetry, bucolic, a genre that the Roman Virgil would later imitate in his eclogues. Callimachus, who lived at the same time as Theocritus, worked his entire adult life at Alexandria and compiled a prose treatise entitled the Pinax, which catalogued the great works held in the library. Aside from a collection of hymns, only fragments of his poetry survive. The most famous work was Atia. In 4 books of elegiac couplets it explained the legendary origin of obscure customs, festivals, and names. Its structure became a model for the work of the Roman poet Ovid. Of his elegies for special occasions, the best known is the Lock of Berenice, a piece of court poetry which formed part of the Aetia and was later adapted by the Roman Catullus. Callimachus also wrote short poems for special occasions and at least one short epic, the Ibis, which was directed against his former pupil Apollonius. Apollonius of Rhodes was born about 295 BC. He is best remembered for his epic The Argonautica, about Jason and his shipmates in search of the Golden Fleece. Apollonius studied under Callimachus, with whom he later quarreled. He also served as librarian at Alexandria for about 13 years. Apart from the Argonautica, he wrote poems on the foundation of cities as well as a number of epigrams. The Roman poet Virgil was strongly influenced by the Argonautica in writing his Aeneid. Lesser 3rd-century poets include Aratus of Soli and Herodas. Aratus wrote the Phenomena, a poetic version of a treatise on the stars by Eudoxus of Cnidus, who had lived in the 4th century. Herodas wrote mimes reminiscent of those of Theocritus. His works give a hint of the popular entertainment of the times. Mime and pantomime were a major form of entertainment during the early Roman Empire. Hellenistic drama. The best-known form of drama in the Hellenistic period was the New Comedy, of which Menander was the primary author.